Hey guys, Windsor here and welcome to the Groove Guru podcast. Today I want to explore something which, as I see it, is what everybody really wants, whether they know it or not. And that's happiness and enjoyment of life. I spent years chasing happiness in many places that I later realised it wasn't. And after coming to a deeper realization of where happiness and enjoyment actually is, which can often be overlooked, today I want to dive into a deeper understanding and uncover how we can awaken to the happiness and enjoyment that is naturally and readily available to us, regardless of circumstances. For some parallels to what I'll be covering here today, check out my recent podcast episode, Finding Mental Well-Being as a Musician. And it's not just for musicians, but for everyone, and points to how, as I see it, the essence of well-being, mental health, and happiness is universal. Starting things off in this one, there's a great quote by Abraham Hicks that really piqued my interest when I heard it, that I want to explore, and goes, "Everything that you want is because you think you will feel better in the having of it." What I hear in that is, when it can look like we want a certain thing in the world to feel better, what we're often really after is the feeling that we think that thing will give us. In other words, what we really want, and what all of our wanting is about, is to feel a certain way. And as I see it, we're all looking for happiness and enjoyment. Yet I've noticed a tendency for people to misattribute the source of that happiness and enjoyment. And growing up in my teens and 20s, that was the case for me. Happiness was something on my radar that really made sense in terms of life being worthwhile. And being someone who was often pretty depressed and really serious, I looked for happiness in many places, from computer games and escape that way, martial arts and relationships and sex and music and drumming, and chasing recognition that way. And when I did those things, I would often feel kind of happy. And it looked to me like those activities were the source of that happiness and enjoyment. But then something in me noticed that sometimes I engaged in those things and felt happy, but at other times I really didn't. But I didn't know why, and kind of still thought it was the activities I was doing that would make me feel happy. So I would flip from one activity to the next one. Maybe this one will make me happy. I'd buy another CD, play another game, find another lover, looking for that elusive happiness on the outside. Then I realised something that became absolutely fascinating to me, that was how differently I could feel in the same circumstance or activity, and significantly impacted by the discoveries of Scottish mystic Sydney Banks, just how central the role of the mind is in our experience. And I still find it amazing, beyond words, how a deeper understanding of the true nature of the mind continues to bring happiness and enjoyment beyond what I ever thought possible. And we'll explore this as we go on today. And the first thing I want to look at is that we're born happy. Happiness is something that we're born with and we still have access to. If we look at babies, they're born with perfect happiness and peace of mind. And then as they grow and they learn to think and develop emotions that they feel via their thought and their senses, one moment they'll cry, the next moment they'll laugh, and everything in between. But they always get over those experiences, usually pretty quickly, and return to their happiness. And through time, we lose touch with that happiness. And as we grow and change and become bigger kids, which I'm guessing you probably are if you're listening to this podcast, we still do the same thing that we think and we feel what our thought is doing, but often get caught up in those experiences and the details that cover up that innate happiness to the extent that we can lose touch with it and get in a habit of being preoccupied, caught up and distracted in the noise of our head. Why is that? As I see it, there are some misunderstandings, a misunderstanding that is fundamental to this. And part of that is that as we grow up, we see adults being really serious and focus on their problems and in their head a lot. And we often don't question that and think that when we are adults, that's how we're supposed to be, way more serious and way less happy. But that's not necessarily true. And there's a tendency for people also to innocently develop a misunderstanding of where our psychological experience comes from that permeates our culture and gets in the way of our happiness. And fortunately, we can wake up to that and through insight return to a deeper level of mind, which I'll refer to as the happiness within, which is pretty awesome and often overlooked and actually profoundly ordinary, yet so extraordinary that when we realize that, the nature of it, we have all the happiness that we want and it makes us more effective at what we do and makes everything we're engaged with so much more enjoyable. And the first part of the misunderstanding that people have is that where we think happiness is usually where it isn't. And as children, most of us are loved unconditionally by our parents until we grow up a few years more. And if we don't tidy our room, love is withheld. And if we don't get grades at school that are great, we won't be appreciated. And those kind of things lead to that perception that love and happiness are conditional and somewhere on the outside. And basically, when I do this, fill in the blank, whatever it is that you're approved of, then I'll be happy. And over time, that leads to a pattern of looking for happiness where it isn't in the external circumstances. That's the I'll be happy when belief. And it's why some people are never satisfied no matter how much stuff they accumulate, and they delay their happiness to some future date. I'll be happy when. And they think, when I get that partner, that job, that gig, that money, that status, those toys, then I'll feel happy. But how often have we gotten the things that we wanted and found a temporary rush of excitement and then realised that's not our lasting happiness? And, we get the new toy and initially we fall in love with it. And then a few days later, we're on a different level and we're not so into it. And without seeing the role of the mind in that, we think that we don't feel happy if we're not feeling happy because we don't have the right toys. So we get another toy thinking that that's the answer to our happiness. And it doesn't bring that. And then if we don't see what's actually going on and how we're creating our experience, that looking for happiness on the outside continues. So finding that true nature of happiness isn't about that I'll be happy when. Now, I'm not suggesting not going after things in the world, creating great relationships, making more money doing what you love, but mainly here that exploring happiness and where the core true nature of our happiness and enjoyment is more about where that actually is, which is always within. Another misunderstanding that people can often experience that gets in the way of that happiness is believing that happiness is thought content. And another realization that was really powerful for me was that heavy, serious thought content can really get in the way of feeling happy, right? And the example that comes to mind, it relates to my love for great headphones. And I was really engaged in headphones as a hobby a few years ago. And I used to review headphones for Sennheiser and get really into the details of analysing various headphones and the cable and how that would change the sound of various recordings in different formats. And I would get what appeared to be the best headphones available, like sometimes buying headphones that cost thousands of pounds, and all to help me enjoy the music more. And then I would put them on and write about them and analyze it. And I would get so into the analysis of the headphone that listening to music stopped being fun and enjoyable. And essentially what I saw was the more I was in deep analysis of the headphone, the less I enjoyed the music. And the less I was analysing the headphone, the more I enjoyed the music. And relating that to the mind, it's that when we are constantly preoccupied with analysis and the content of our thinking, it creates a more distorted and unclear state of mind, which can get pretty heavy and feel pretty burdensome and cover up that natural enjoyment of what we're doing, just like clouds would get in the way of the sun. Yet when we've got less on our mind and are more present as a result of when we're less preoccupied and our mind's clearer, and we let go of those clouds of thought, they part and the sun shines through again. And then life feels effortlessly happier, much more enjoyable. And in that state, we also tend to think much clearer and do much better at whatever we're doing. Now, again, I'm not suggesting that we don't engage with the content of thought, not at all. But we recognize when it's helpful to do that and when it's unhelpful and not in our best interests to be as preoccupied. And I'll explore that some more as we go. The third misunderstanding I wanted to share here is the fundamental misunderstanding I see that gets in the way of our natural happiness and enjoyment, which is not realizing the source of our experience. As I said, there's a tendency to think that happiness comes from outside us. So we seek happiness in external things. And we might think that being preoccupied with heavy thought content and intellectual analysis brings happiness. It really doesn't. When it comes to accessing more of that happiness and enjoyment within and more unburdened effectiveness in what we do, a deeper understanding of how our experience is actually created plays a key role. Now, getting to the heart of this, I want to talk about the power of thought. And in a nutshell, our perceptual experience of life is what our mind's doing. And what I realised that is so powerful is that we don't experience the world out there, external circumstances. We experience our state of mind, our level of consciousness in the moment, all the time. As my state of mind changes, the same situation can look totally different. And that's mind-blowing. You know, in a serious state of mind, like when I was intensely analysing the headphones, I don't enjoy the music much at all because I'm so preoccupied and I don't really hear it because there's so much static. Whereas in a freer, clearer, happier state of mind, in a way the headphone doesn't even matter because I'm just hearing the music purely as it is, you know, unencumbered, unburdened. And again, I'm not saying it doesn't mean don't work and make more money and buy more headphones and toys to enjoy, but the key to being really happy and enjoying them, it's not in the analysis, but purely experiencing whatever it is that you're doing with a much freer and clearer mind, which is so available effortlessly when you know where to look. And again, I find that so powerful and life-changing to realise that we're only ever experiencing our state of mind and our level of consciousness in the moment. And when we see to the nature of that beneath that noise in our head, we feel back into the essence of that pure mind that we're all born with, which is love. And as we feel that loving presence within, that's where our mental well-being and pure mental health is. And our happiness and enjoyment appear effortlessly from here. Life looks much simpler. And from this space, we create experience that's fresh and new. And it's a magical space to live from. And as I see it, pretty extraordinary and the best feeling there is. Now, in addition to some of those misunderstandings about where our experience comes from, which can get in the way of happiness, there's some other common blocks to happiness, you could say, that I've seen that appear to cloud the light of our happiness and enjoyment of life. And the first is thoughts about the apparent past or future. And dwelling on those kind of thoughts about the past or future, it's a key way I've noticed myself and other people being unhappy at times. And I want to share some of what I've learned that helps me alleviate unnecessary suffering and unhappiness and unlock more happiness for me and anyone listening to this. And as we go about our life, events happen, and to some events we have more intense emotional reactions to than others. And you could call those like significant emotional events with lots of emotional charge, and these can come up and appear to really get in the way of our happiness. And that could be following a relationship breakup or losing a job, bankruptcy, a loved one dying. And without an understanding of how we're creating our experience of life, it can look like those events in the world that have happened are responsible for our unhappiness. Just like external activities we seek happiness in apparently do. But how can it be that those events that actually did happen and are now in the past, which is now just an illusion of thought, how can those things have happened yet we still feel a certain way about them? And again, we live in a world of thought. We're constantly thinking, and whatever we feel it, and it feels real via the senses, via the power of the principle of thought. And that's why we can imagine something and it feels real. Like if you imagine having half of a juicy lemon in your hand and you put it to your mouth, and you put it in your mouth and you chew, you're going to feel that, and there was no lemon. You imagined it and it felt real, and that activated your salivary glands, and the power of thought, it really feels real to something that's just an illusion. And we've all got, when it comes to the past, things that have happened that we can think of that take us out of our happiness right now. Me too. And we can't control when those things pop into our head. Me too. And what we can learn to recognize that's helpful is that because every thought we think we feel, we can tell by our feelings when we've thought our way out of our happiness. When you're feeling off and unhappy, it's always because of what your thoughts doing in the moment. That's it. If you're feeling sad, unhappy, regret, resentment, or any other of those feelings that you don't want about anything that has happened in the past, any actual event, again, the only reason you feel that is because what you're thinking and feeling right now. And you're never going to be able to change the fact that if you think it, you're going to feel it. Though when we understand that, we can navigate that dynamic with much more grace and get out of our own way much more. And here, and it's so cool, is when you ever experience unhappiness in the moment, the way back to that happiness is to let go and disengage from that unhappy thinking and come back into that pure feeling presence of love in the moment, where there's a natural, better feeling space in which no matter what emotion it was that you felt, a deeper space of clarity, peacefulness, and freedom is there, which naturally gives rise to clearer, happier, and more helpful thought. And it's that simple. Yet, that's not how we're often taught. I remember reading in a very popular psychology book once words to the effect that when we're feeling at our most negative and seeing the world really negatively, that's how you truly see things. That's the real way you see things. And reflecting on that, yes and no. Because yes, as in, if you're in a really clear and unclear state of mind, everything you think about reflects that feeling and feels that way. So that would be how you are feeling life in the moment via your state of mind. But as you would let go of that thinking and let it move through, and your thought would naturally change and your head would clear and your level of clarity rises, the same situations would look totally different. And when we see that every experience we have is a state of mind and that we can navigate it with much more freedom and that you don't need to believe anything that you think, is immensely liberating and a godsend, quote unquote, so to speak, to realise when it comes to accessing greater happiness and enjoyment of life right now. Now, the other aspect of the past thoughts that we experience, that we can bring them to life in the moment via thought, is we can project them onto an apparent future. And I say apparent because, again, past and future are products of the mind, of time. They exist conceptually as thought illusions. And depending on our state of mind, it can lead to our outlook being more pessimistic or optimistic. So, for example, say a relationship we were in ended, whatever that was. And in a lower state of mind, we might think, oh, there's no point in getting into another relationship. You know, it will just end again. So what's the point in trying? And if that's practice, that can lead to the pattern that we don't do relationships. I don't do relationships. But in a clearer, higher state of mind, even though the same situation happened, that relationship ended, we might think, well, okay, that one didn't last, but I know I can get over my feelings about that, and they're a temporary mirage, and you know, I can show up fresh and new and happy on other dates with a clear head and be open to seeing what happens. And if I do that, I've got more chance of, you know, recognizing someone I click with, and in that space, it's always the best space to come from when you're with another person. Dating seems fun again. Say there was a job that we had that we lost, you know, in a lower state of mind, we might think, what's the point in getting another job? I'll probably just lose it again. You know, blah, blah, blah. But then in a higher state of mind, we might think, well, okay, if I get another job, you know, I'll have my learnings from the previous job that I can take on board, and even if this job, the next job I get isn't it, then eventually I'll find the right one. Or yeah, maybe I can start a business. Well, other people have done that, so why not me? Why not be my own boss? That's pretty cool. Okay, what can I create for people that they'll really value and that I can charge for? Let's go. So, different state of mind, different experience about the same situation without the situation changing, right? And when we wake up to our state of mind is how we're experiencing life from the inside out, only always, it can help us see that our perceptions about situations aren't fixed, but fluid. And it brings us more options for how we can view them. And we all have thought patterns that we practice through repetition and are learned and habitualized. And they can be unlearned, which is especially helpful if whatever we've habitually thought has been pretty unhelpful and unproductive. And we can think in any way about any situation. And even if we've thought about the same thing in the same way for years, a whole new way of thinking that's more helpful and resourceful is available to us one thought away, which is when we quiet our mind and get present to that as an actual reality. And when we see how our state of mind influences our reality moment to moment, it becomes a natural process to let go of the thinking we do that's unhelpful and gets in the way to accessing that space where we're in our clearest and best state and where fresh and new helpful perspective readily flows. And again, it's all thought. And as another way of saying it that relates to the theme of this episode, that's happiness, is that when we get preoccupied with thoughts of an apparent past or future in a way that's burdensome and heavy and distracted, it takes us out of the present, and that's where our happiness actually is. One last thing I want to touch on in this episode is addictions, which is a big subject and something that people often resort to resolve unhappiness. And I want to share some insight I've found helpful in addressing that. Now, what can often happen is that when people have feelings that are uncomfortable and they don't like, which, as we're saying, is essentially caused by how we're experiencing the principle of thought moment to moment. If a person doesn't know where their experience is coming from psychologically, in an attempt to feel better emotionally, they often try to numb themselves with addictions from the outside in an attempt to remedy those feelings and fix them. And that can result in turning to substances, drugs, alcohol, porn, sex, video games, shopping, working excessively, anything else you can pretty much turn into an addiction. Whilst those addictions and behaviours can provide temporary relief and distraction from uncomfortable thought and feelings, they don't solve the unhappiness in a lasting way. And when a person doesn't realise where to look to for the nature of their inbuilt happiness, well-being and resilience, and then discontentment comes back and they then engage in their addictive behaviour again to find an apparent external answer, and they experience temporary relief that doesn't solve the problem, and then they get caught up in this addiction cycle, habitually thinking that an external solution is the answer. But the reason that those external addiction behaviours ultimately don't provide a lasting answer to unhappiness and discontentment is that the experience of the emotion that people are trying to get over, it's not created from the outside. It's created from the inside, and it doesn't require an external action to be fixed, though it can appear that way. And this is what people do sometimes, is that chasing happiness outside. That's not where happiness is. And when we realise that the following of the compulsion of an addiction won't resolve that emotional discomfort and unhappiness, and yet the compulsion to do that behaviour continues, what many people have found really helpful in overcoming their unhelpful addictive behaviour is recognising that the feeling of the compulsion, that urge to use and do the thing that they're addicted to, that they know is not in their best interests, the feeling's not coming from that thing, but the feeling of the thinking that they're doing about it. So the compulsion and the urge to drink alcohol, for example, is not coming from the bottle of whatever it is, beaming feelings of drink me. Or if it's a food addiction, the feeling's not coming from the crisps or the donuts or the sweets, beaming feelings of eat me. It's essentially, those feelings are an experience of thought in the moment. And when we see that those feelings are coming from thought and illusory constructions that feel real, we can see that those constructions of thought, they're not instructions, and we don't need to act on them. Especially the ones that take us down a behavioural path, such as unhelpful addictions. When people realise that I don't need to act on that and I can see it's not in my best interests, we can see that we don't need to jump on those trains of thought. And that perspective can be so helpful. And as those thought illusions pass, the feeling passes, the compulsive feeling dissolves, and we get quieter in our mind. And ultimately, the more we see that clarity, the more we realise that we have everything we need in this moment, and I don't need to ingest a substance to feel better. And here's a really key insight in this that I found really useful, is that when we are at a lower level of consciousness, when we use our preferred substance, it appears to bring us up, whether that's cigarettes, wine, porn, or whatever. And when we're at a higher level of consciousness, when we use our preferred substance, the same activity can bring us down and fog up our perspective. And realizing the essence of that our feelings, they're not coming from externals, but thought in the moment, it can be so liberating and a natural pointer to the happiness that we are and the natural enjoyment of life that innately occurs in a clear mind that isn't dependent on externals to feel that way, from which our common sense appears and can readily show us how to let go of unhelpful addictions and behaviour with virtually no effort. And as I see that, that's a hopeful and very practical answer to overcoming addictions. To reiterate a point that I made, when it comes to accessing happiness, a useful pointer is noticing the feeling that you're in contrary to that. And if you're not feeling happy, you can let that feeling be a guide to point you back like a compass to your happiness and enjoyment by noticing that feeling and disengaging from that thinking to feel more calmness and clarity. And again, if you think your feeling comes from externals, you're going to try to change externals or effort to change your thinking to get happy. And as we're exploring, we can see that doesn't work. And I invite you to consider that this is actually how it works, that we have an experience coming from within and we can feel different in the presence of the same circumstance. And when we try to get to happiness and enjoyment in a clear head, that doesn't work because you can't think your way to clarity. Okay? The clarity I'm pointing to. And when we realize that we have all the happiness and enjoyment that we want, that's effortless to get to and be, it's all about living in a mind that's at ease, free, and clear. And when you wake up to that essence beyond thought content and see that you're the thinker via the principle of thought, and you recognize that you're experiencing and thinking up experiences that take you out of your happiness, and that you can stop thinking that way, you'll move in that direction of happiness naturally and intuitively. And the more you naturally allow that to happen, it's pretty life-changing across the board and pretty freaking cool, if you ask me. And when you realize that that happiness and enjoyment that you have always sought is freely available, and that as you stop seeking it, and but for your thinking, you can then open to the heart of where it really is. As another way of exploring this before we finish up, there's a beautiful Chinese proverb I love that says, "You cannot prevent the birds of sorrow from flying over your head, but you can prevent them from building nests in your hair." And what I hear in that is that we can't stop negative thoughts from occurring, but we don't need to dwell on them. And again, the feeling you're in tells you how happy and helpful your use of thought is in the moment. And if your feelings are off, don't listen to that thought. As quite frankly, it's unhelpful if you want to find this true happiness and enjoyment that we're pointing to. And as we let go of that thought that disturbs us and simply feel, we come back to the present where our head's clear and we start to feel better and naturally wake up to that innate happiness and enjoyment that's naturally within us. So, as we wrap things up for today, again, happiness and enjoyment is your natural state, and it's not in a specific location or specific activity. It's portable. You can take it anywhere. And it's not an intellectual concept, but in the feeling of a clear and pure mind. And when you notice that you're not happy, which you can tell by the feeling, it's so good to know that it's not coming from the external world, but coming from thought. And waking up to the fact of your effortless happiness and enjoyment, that arises with so much ease and infuses all you do in a way that's pretty cool. And there's a beautiful quote I love from Persian poet Rumi, who, as I see it in this quote, it points to the true nature of happiness in a very cool way, and will bring us full circle for this one. "There is nothing outside of yourself. Look within. Everything you want is there. You are that. The happiness you seek is not on the outside, the situations in the world or in your thought content. It's within you in a deeper feeling, in your deeper realization of the nature of heartfelt presence beyond form, in the space that all form is created from, within. And you directly access this essence when you feel love, which is the pure perfection and happiness and enjoyment that you were born with, and it's endlessly available to you right here and right now when you open to it. So, embrace the present, notice when you're taking yourself out of it, and let go of those unhelpful thoughts and awaken to that beautiful happiness and enjoyment within you. Savour that juicy love. And I'll talk with you soon.